So I'm going to start now with the survey itself and the study, and talk about why we're doing this and how we're doing this, and the data collection tool and the manual. As we go through this, I'm not going to just read from the manual. That wouldn't be a good use of any of our time. But I do want to direct you to the manual because it has a great deal of good information that I think you can probably find many of your answers to your questions in if you go there. So we'll start with the objectives, and if you're looking at the manual, you will find that these objectives are on page 50. So where I can, I'll reference the manual, the page in the manual where this information as we go forward. So the objectives are to describe antimicrobial use practices in feed and water on feedlots with a capacity of at least 50 head. And we will split that capacity into a large capacity and a small capacity feedlot that we'll define in just a few minutes. Our goal is to estimate the percentage of feedlots administering and percentage of cattle receiving specific antimicrobials in feed and water by reasons for use. This will provide baseline data on antimicrobial use practices in place prior to the implementation of the FDA policy change that I referenced earlier. Note that our reference date is January 1st, 2017, so we are looking for data from calendar year 2016, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The baseline for calendar year 2016 can be used to evaluate trends in use over time. And very importantly, we want to describe stewardship practices on these feedlots. So the specifications of this study is here the feedlot operations with 50 or more heads are the population of interest. We have these separated into larger cattle feedlots with 1,000 or more head, and those are in 16 states. Those are listed there. This covers 97% or more of the large operations and 92% of the operations with 1,000 or more head. And this represents then 80% of U.S. cattle on feed. We are actually trying to enroll all large cattle feedlot operations in the 16 states. So for small cattle feedlots in the 50 to 999 head level, those are in 13 states, and those are listed there. We believe that small cattle feedlots may have different management practices than the larger ones, and this represents 91% of the operations and 92% of the inventory on those operations. So the materials for collecting data using these surveys are here, the things that we recommend that you be pretty well familiar with before you go out into the field. I highly recommend you read through the manual prior to the visit. There are scenarios listed in here that will give you some ideas for the type of hypothetical questions you might be requested to answer when you're working with the producer. The launch sheet is available on the SharePoint site, so we recommend that you have a copy of that when you go out, and you can leave that certainly with the producer. That contains the specifications, the objectives, where they can get further information, the NAHMS survey site, and so forth. So that's, I think that's a nice piece of information you can leave with the producer. Bill went over the confidentiality pledge there, and so I'm not going to talk about that anymore. And then the questionnaire, of course, that we'll be going over. And all these materials are available at the coordinator page on the SharePoint site. So just an overview of the questionnaire in general before we dive in and start talking about it specifically. The main topics that we'll be covering in the questionnaire are the inventory of animals, that is by breed type and by weight, the use of antimicrobials on the feedlot, that's feed and water use, We do have some injectable questions as well, but our real focus is feed and water use because those are the changes that occurred in the FDA guidance for industry number 213. These are all by weight, by reason for use, and duration. Questions on stewardship of antimicrobials, and just to note that these topics are similar to the content in the NAHMS 2011 feedlot study. Although the feedlot study was much more comprehensive, our questions were mostly drawn from that study. As Bill noted, this is a voluntary program, and participation is not required, but it's sincerely appreciated. We understand that this can be a burden for producers to give up an hour of their time, and we do want to show our appreciation to them and to you for out in the field for working on this. This is your, I think, to VS and to NAHMS. Regarding responses, if a participant declines to respond to a question, write a note and continue to the next question. If an answer seems unusual or the quality of data is questionable, record the response and write your comments adjacent to the question. If you need to make a note to yourself to write those questions after you leave the feedlot, that would be fine too, because it helps to have informative information about a question that seems unusual. And as I said before, on page 49 of the manual, there is a list of definitions. I highly recommend that you read through some of those definitions because there are definitions of things such as growth promotion antibiotics, disease prevention, disease control, disease treatment, and these might be important for a producer to understand why you're standing there speaking with them. Going on now, having records available on hand is highly encouraged for the producer. In the phone call where you're introducing yourself and setting up the visit, you can emphasize that having those treatment or other records on hand will be beneficial. It will give you more time at the visit to record actual data. If the producer has the records in hand, if you can allow time for him or her to refer those records to respond, that would be great. We haven't required records, of course. I don't really have a note here about whether or not we can just accept records. If they want to hand you a photocopy of their records and you can put it with the survey, we will not turn that down. The only thing that I will emphasize here is that if they hand you records and it has any personal identifying information on it, you cannot forward that to us. And I will make that point again later, just as Bill did. NAHMS does not want to see any PII. We want no proprietary information that's associated with that information. We only want to see a NAHMS ID. The data collectors will have that for PII, and then, as Bill said, we'll destroy it at a certain time in the future. Zero means zero, not don't know. So if the response is don't know, record it as a don't know. Don't record it as zero. And the last two pages of the questionnaire are the approved lists of antibiotics for cattle on feed, in water, and feed. That's an awkward, but for feedlot cattle, in water, and feed. Those are the antibiotics that are approved. So when you go to the visit, you can pair these two pages off and offer them to the producer for reference. These are also available on the FDA website if you need more information on those particular antibiotics. Okay, I'm going to pause here for just a second, and I've been talking for about 15 minutes, so I'd just like to know if there are any questions. I want to open it up to questions before I continue. Okay, hearing none, we'll continue with the overview. We'd like to have you return completed questionnaires to your field coordinator within 3 working days of the interview or completion of the survey. So as I said, these data might not be available right during the visit. So if the participant offers to look up data and provide them later, we are happy to have that, and we're okay with you accepting that later and recording it. So if there's a delay from the producer, the best information that we can gather is what we want. So if you can collect that information later, please do so, and perhaps you could just note with your field coordinator any delays, and then the field coordinator can talk with Abby and us about whether or not these delays will be an issue. If the respondent decides not to participate during the visit, if they decline to participate, please complete the office use only section at the back of the survey. I think that's section B, and return that page to the study coordinator. And again, we want to emphasize it's okay to write comments on the questionnaire, but use caution, no personal identifying information on the questionnaire that's forwarded to STIA or NAHMS. Again, we are collecting these data only for calendar year 2016, and that's January 1st through December 31st of 2016. We note that this period is different for those of you who will be doing the swine surveys for us. That period is the last half of 2016. And then we have questions regarding information on the person or roles who, I'm sorry, I think this is a mistake. We have these sections in our swine survey, so I didn't catch this in my review of this PowerPoint. We're going to ignore the questions requesting information, which is referring to the slide survey. Okay, so we are going to move into the cover sheet information. And here, if you have your actual antibiotic use questionnaire for cattle on feed available, I pulled that out right now and have that and your manual available. So we'll start with the cover sheet. And the information on the cover sheet was provided by the consent form from NAHMS. And from NAHMS, you'll have the 2-digit FIPS code, the state FIPS code, and the 4-digit operation number. So we'll have you write those in right there on the front, and then ignore where it says site number. We can ignore that. We do not have a site number for the bee study. We will then combine the 2-digit FIPS code and the 4-digit operation code to create the 6-digit NAHMS ID. We would like you to record this number on each page of the questionnaire, just to make sure that if things get separated, that you have, they can recollect these into a full survey using that identifier. So at the bottom of this cover sheet, there is information on inclusion and exclusion of cattle types. And I just want to note that we're looking for cattle and calves on feed for the slaughter market, regardless of ownership, or on the total acres operated. So we're including cattle being fed by you for others, this would be obviously be speaking to the producer, including cattle being fed by you for others, but we exclude other categories of cattle, those custom feeding, the backgrounding only, and we're excluding cows in bulls. Okay, are there any questions there on the cover sheet? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to Section A. We're now on page 2.
Sorry, this is
questionnaire.
This is Tom Bernoy. I do have a question. On the exclude, when you say backgrounder, does that mean like a backgrounded dairy heifer as well?
We're going to have Chuck respond here, so he's reviewing the question.
Yeah, if they're being backgrounded only, then we want those excluded.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So we'll start with inventory. We're looking for the inventory of calendar year 2016, the number of steers and heifers that were placed on feed for slaughter on the operation. And then we would like to have those stratified or separated by breed and by weight. And so we're looking at a weight group less than 700 pounds and that would be by beef and by dairy breeds. And then we'll have you total those, the same thing with beef breeds and dairy breeds over 700 pounds. And then we'll have you total those and total items 2C through F to have a total for all cattle placed. So then we're looking next at cattle placed, for these cattle placed the average days on feed. And again, we have this by category of beef breeds with arrival weight less than 700 pounds, and those over 700 pounds, and the dairy breeds the same way. And our interest here is that we understand that these could be managed separately if animals show up lighter weight or younger when they arrive to the feedlot. They might have different risk factors than if they came in at a higher weight. And so if you, we're on page 57, I believe, of the manual. If you want to turn to page 57, there's a description. I won't read this to you. Obviously, you can read this yourselves, about why we are requesting data in these weight categories. We've also used these weight categories and breed categories in previous NAHMS studies, and we want to be able to compare these across these studies. Okay, so we have the next question is mortality. So we're asking about the cattle that were smaller size on arrival at the feedlot placed on feed, the number that died in 2016. And now this notes that this includes deaths from the time cattle were placed on feed through marketing if it occurred in 2016. And the same information on for cattle that weighed over 700 pounds. And again, it's both breeds in this question. Okay. In our manual, you'll see on page 58 that we are interested in anything, any information on certified organic producers. So just on page 2 of the survey, if you could ask the producer if any of the cattle were raised as certified organic, and if they were raised under a marketing claim of no antibiotics used, what percentage were raised under this marketing claim. This can just be recorded in the notes on page 2 for us, if you would. And you'll see the information on that question in the manual on page 58. Okay, so before we go into section B on antibiotic use, I would like to open it up to questions again and see if anybody has anything that they would like for us to go over. I'll wait a few seconds here for people to unmute if they need to.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, this is Ralph Wesley, and I do have a question. There are cattle that are sold as, and I might have missed that are sold as natural, and then there are cattle that are organic, and there is a difference between those. Do you want to go into that a little bit, or?
Yeah, I'm going to refer to Chuck on that because we didn't really define it specifically as different categories, organic, natural. But yes, I would say notes on those would be helpful.
Yeah, well, certified organic has a clear definition with clear regulations and rules for marketing animals as certified organic, whereas natural doesn't really have well-defined rules recognized by the U.S. government. But often the marketing claims for natural are determined by the producer or the company producing the animals. So if you could just note how many are being marketed as natural and whether that means that they're not getting any antibiotics ever as part of that definition. That's what we're asking for.
Oh, okay. And the cattle part.
Sorry, we couldn't hear that statement. Okay. So we'll go on then to section B, antibiotic use. We're on page 3 of the survey, and we're on page 59 now of the manual. And we're going to start with the first question is the lower weight cattle, 700 pounds or less at placement, and antibiotics in feed. And our first question is whether or not any antibiotics were given in feed during calendar year 2016, January 1st through December 31st. If no antibiotics were given in feed during this period, you can fill in the response no and then skip this next question. So for question 2, for those that were lighter, they were less than 700 pounds at placement, what percentage received in feed any of the antibiotics in the following table? And what we mean by following table is on page 4 of the survey, if you want to see the table that we're referencing, using those antibiotics as a health or production management tool. And then what we're looking for in this table is the primary reason codes for this question. And then we're looking for the, the header to the top of this table on page 4, which is percent primary reason code and average number treated. We do have a note here about pulse dosing an antibiotic, and that is using the same antibiotic on the same pen of cattle multiple times during the feeding period. In this case, you would estimate the total number of days that the antibiotic was used in a typical pen of cattle. If the producer typically used chlortetracycline twice, say for 5 days, stop the administration for 1 to 2 days, and use it another 10 days, you would enter 10 as the number of days that these cattle received chlortetracycline. So there are going to be some scenarios and hypotheticals that will require you to work with the producer to collect the information. And so this pulse dosing would be one of those situations. So our antibiotics, primary reason codes for these antibiotics are on page 3. And again, these are individual and combination products that we're referring to. So the combination products are in reason codes 7 through 11, actually. For information on how similar data were reported in the NAHMS Feedlot 2011 survey, we reference the manual here, and I'll get you that page that is on page 62. You can see how in NAHMS Feedlot 2011 we combine these tables combine these data into table estimates for different categories and report them by category of antibiotics. So this is an example of how these data will be reported. So on these primary reason codes, see if I can, page 63. We have a couple of things here. So for questions, or for codes 1, 2, and 3, note their prevention, control, or treatment of diseases. Question reason 4 is control of coccidia, prevention for control of coccidiosis. And then reason code 5 is actually the growth promotion claim, which is increased rate of gain or improved feed efficiency. And then number 6, the code for number 6 is other disease prevention. And then in that case, we need you to write that information in. We know that some folks who were able to pre-test the survey might have had some other conditions reported to them, and so we do need to have that reported in if it does not fit into categories above. And then you'll see that over on the right, that the reason codes are combined. Codes 3, 4, and 5 actually, the common factor in those is factor or reason code 5, which is increased rate of gain or improved feed efficiency. So you'll see things like rumensin is included in there for increased efficiency or growth promotion. Okay, so does anybody have any questions on the primary reason codes that we're recording? Okay, so we'll move on to the antibiotic use table itself for feed. And here we have some, we have the active ingredients in the table on the far left side, and we have a number of ionophores listed, rumensin, lactalacid, and laethamycin, and then the example trade names, so that if the producer says they used a certain trade name that you're not familiar with, you can look at this table, or you can look at the table at the back of the questionnaire and locate that trade name. We want to record the percent of cattle at placement that receive the product, the primary reason code, and here we have the average number of days a typical pen of cattle receive the antibiotic in feed throughout the feeding period. And so this is a duration variable that we're interested in, that you might get some feedback from producers about recording this information. And I think in the manual we have a reference to, and I'm going to try and find that reference. Oh, this is on page 60. At the top of page 60 is a note about collecting data on the duration of feed of an antibiotic. So we'd like you to read through that. Basically, what this says is that the FDA is interested in comments. They put out a Federal Register notice on the use of medically important antibiotics in livestock feed without a defined duration of use. And they're looking for comments on this. Some producer groups have expressed concern that this is an indication that FDA was planning to take action to place limits on the length of time of use of antibiotics. So producers, as we know, producers might be concerned that if they provide information, it could be used as evidence by FDA to justify their intent to place limits on duration. And we understand this could be sensitive for producers to provide this. We have two notes there. Please remind them that NAHMS is a voluntary program and that none of their information will be released or discoverable. Also, a producer can skip a question. We prefer they didn't. We'd like them to answer this honestly if they can. But we do understand this is a sensitive issue right now for some producers. Let's see. I also wanted to note that in the manual on pages 60 and 61 are some examples and hypotheticals that for you to review before you talk with producers. I think this could be helpful. And if you have any questions on these, if you have time to read these over during the break and you'd like to ask any questions afterwards, we'll have time at the end to talk about these things. Okay, so how are we doing on time here? Okay, we're doing okay? I'm not sure what time it is. Okay, 10 after, so we'll probably take our first break around 10:15 still. Okay, all right, just want to make sure. Does anybody have any questions about anything that I said there? Just want to make sure we're okay. So going on to questions 3 and 4, use of antibiotics in feed for cattle over 700 pounds at placement. These are the same types of questions that we asked for those less than 700 pound cattle. And questions 3 and 4 are basically the same. Primary reason codes are listed on page 5. And I believe they are all the same questions for questions 2 and question 4. And the same background information on pulse dosing antibiotics. So there should be plenty of information there for you to help you answer these questions or help the producer answer the questions. And again, the question 4, the table completion is the same. Percent of cattle at placement that received the product, the primary reason code, and the duration of days that a typical pen received this product through the feeding period. So that is our antibiotic use and primary reasons for use in feed. Again, sort of a demonstration or display of how we use these data in NAHMS 2011 are also included in the manual, and you can see that on page 65. We have percent of feedlots that used each of these antibiotics that are reported there. And in the NAHMS 2011 studies, we used both. We recorded whether it was in feed and or water. As we go forward with this study, we're separating feed and water. So that's an important distinction. Those numbers will obviously be different between the feedlot 2011 study and this study. But we have collected this data before, and we have reported them, and we report them in the aggregate in case producers are questioning our collection of this information. Okay. So we have the next section of antibiotic use and primary reasons for use in water. I think maybe I'll give it another few seconds to see if there are any questions before we go forward. I'm thinking we might take an early break. Yeah, we've been talking for an hour and 10 minutes for folks who need to take a break. Tanya, we'd like to do that now. If you would, if there's anything that you need to announce or do prior to the break.
Okay, participants, we can go ahead and take a break now. You're welcome to stay on the line and mute your line. There will be an announcement made at the start of the call, as we resume the call.
Hello, we are back. This is Kathy, Abby, Chuck, and Bill. We have a couple of things that we want to cover before we move on through the PowerPoint. First of all, are there any questions after the break if you've had time to review materials or look at the manual? If you want to go over any questions or clarifications or anything, we'll start with that. Okay, one thing I do want to talk about is a correction that about the antibiotic list that can be shared with the producer at the visit. Chuck wants to make sure that that is clear. Go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, before you ask the questions about antibiotic use in feed or water, it would be good to tear off the last page of the questionnaire. That would be page 17, and give that to the producer to follow along with, so that they have a list of the antibiotics used in cattle feed and water, as well as the reason codes. There is also an antibiotic list at the end of the manual, and that's more for your use. Just as an FYI to know what antibiotics are approved for use in feed and water.
Okay, so that's very helpful, and earlier I might have said that the antibiotic lists were at the end of the manual for you, and I certainly should have said it. Lists at the end of the questionnaire are the ones that you should feel comfortable tearing off and giving to the producer for reference. Okay, so we are now on section B, question 5, and we are covering the antibiotics used in water for cattle, going back to my questionnaire here. For steers and heifers placed on feed, were any antibiotics given in water during the period in calendar year 2016? So importantly here, this is all cattle. This is not by weight. This is for all of the steers and heifers, so you don't need to separate this by weight. Also note that the reason codes for this question are much shorter than the reason codes for questions 2 and 4 because there are no growth promotion labeled uses for antibiotic use in water. And so here we have just control or treatment of bacterial pneumonia, enteritis, also foot rot. Then we have an other category, and again, this is one where we are happy if you would write in any other control or treatment uses, disease control or treatment uses, and write down what the disease condition was. We need that information, or if there is another reason for use of the antibiotics in water. And then question 6, we have the table on the use of antibiotics in water, and on the left column we have the ingredient name, and this list is shorter than it was for those in feed. And the list of antibiotics in this case does not include the ionophores, which are considered antibiotics. So these are more traditional antibiotics, the tetracyclines, neomycin, and the sulfa-type drugs. Then we have the example trade names, and if the producer needs to look through the list to find it, hopefully they'll be there. The percent of cattle that receive the product, the primary reason code, again there are only 5 of them, and the average number of days a typical pen receive the antibiotic in water. And again, this is a duration question, and we might have, again, you might get some feedback from the producer about whether or not they want to produce or give you that information. Okay, so we're going to move on then to injectables. I just wanted to see in the manual if we are, what page we're on? We're on page 68 now in the manual, moving on to injectable antibiotics. And with injectables, the information we're interested in is the percent of cattle treated as a group with an injectable. And note that you'll see in the definitions earlier in the manual, we've defined what a group treatment as a group means, and that means that at least 90% of the cattle in a pen were treated with an injectable antibiotic. And on page 68, you'll see that there are some hypothetical situations, some questions for some more context around the treatment as a group and with an injectable. These are related to metaphylaxis, where animals are usually treated on initial processing after arriving on the feedlot. And so we have some explanations for why we're collecting these data specifically, why we've used these cutoffs, and so forth. So please read through the explanations on page 68, and if you have any questions, let us know either now or as we go forward. So some notes on the challenges of treating at the herd level. That is that injectables are more effective than treatment by feed because sick cattle may not eat. and that the antibiotics in seed tend to be older versions and not as effective as the newer injectables. So for people who are producers who are interested in why we're looking at injectables, this is an important point. And these are usually used on initial processing, and I think we have a description of using it for only the initial run on arrival, the initial use on arrival, not for second or third uses. Chuck, do you have a note about that?
Right. If they're run through the chute twice, or if they're mass treated twice, we only want you to record the first time that they were run through the chute. If they were group treated more than once, write that down in the margin and write down what they were treated with.
Right. So if we go on to question 8, though, of those treated as a group to prevent, control, or treat disease, we have a point about what percentage were treated with the listed antibiotics. So we have an example in the manual, and I believe that, let's see, on the bottom of page 68, and that is that if they should sum to 100%, so 8A through 8M, the antibiotics used, should sum to 100%. So for example, if 25% of the cattle were treated as a group in question 7, question 8 asks, of that 25%, what antibiotic was used. If 50% were treated with Exceed and 50% were treated with Resflor, you would put 50 for 8D and 50 for 8C, and then you would record that as you would total that to 100%. And so, as Chuck noted, cattle shouldn't be treated with more than one antibiotic during a trip through the chute. If they are, make a note in the margin about which antibiotic was used. Okay, are there any questions here? I think the injectable antibiotics might have more questions for us than some of the feed and water uses. So I'll pause here for a few seconds to see if you have any questions about this. Okay, so we'll just go on to question 9, and that's on page 9 of the manual. And here we're asking about the importance of the reasons for treating cattle as a group with an injectable. And we have 10, 11 different reasons that the producer will need to respond to. And each one of them, we would like you to select one of those reasons, the importance of those reasons. So we would like literally an answer to each question, whether that's important on the long shipping distance, the arrival weight, the appearance, shipping fever, and so forth. So this information has been recorded in earlier studies, so we can compare this with some of the earlier feedlot studies to see if these have changed at all over time. And this is important for stewardship as well. Why they are treating some of these animals on arrival at the feedlot. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the actual antimicrobial use questions. And if you have any questions about how we're recording the data, how we're collecting it, and so forth, you can certainly raise them at the end here. I think we'll move on to stewardship questions now. And here we're on starting on page 10 of the questionnaire, and we're on page 69 of the manual.
Yeah, no, not a problem.
Great. All right, have a great day.
You too.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.